Part 3, the truth about Jesus. Excuse me. When we come to the more important chapters about Jesus, we meet with greater difficulties. Have you ever noticed that the day on which Jesus is supposed to have died falls invariably on a Friday? What is the reason for this? It is evident that nobody knows, and nobody ever knew, the date on which the crucifixion took place. If it ever took place, it is so obscure and so mythical, that an artificial day has been fixed by the ecclesiastical councils, while it is always on a Friday that the crucifixion is commemorated. The week in which the day occurs varies from year to year. Good Friday falls not before the spring equinox, but as soon after the spring equinox as the full moon allows, thus making the calculation depend upon the position of the sun in the zodiac and the phases of the moon. But that was precisely the way the day for the festival of the pagan goddess Oestera was determined. The pagan Oestera has become the Christian Easter. Does not this fact, as well as those already touched upon, make the story of Jesus read very much like the story of the pagan deities? The early Christians' Origen, for instance, in his reply to the rationalist Celsus, who questioned the reality of Jesus, instead of producing evidence of a historical nature, appealed to the mythology of the pagans to prove that the story of Jesus was no more incredible than those of the Greek and Roman gods. This is so important that we refer our readers to Origen's own words on the subject. Before replying to Celsus, it is necessary to admit that in the matter of history, however true it might be, writes this Christian father, it is often very difficult and sometimes quite impossible to establish its truth by evidence which shall be considered sufficient. This is a plain admission that as early as the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the claims put forth about Jesus did not admit of positive historical demonstration, but in the absence of evidence, Origen offers the following metaphysical arguments against the skeptical Celsus. 1. Such stories as are told of Jesus are admitted to be true when told of pagan divinities. Why can they not also be true when told of the Christian Messiah? They must be true because they are the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. In other words, the only proofs Origen can bring forth against the rationalistic criticism of Celsus is that to deny Jesus would be equivalent to denying both the pagan and Jewish mythologies. If Jesus is not real, says Origen, then Apollo was not real, and the Old Testament prophecies have not been fulfilled. If we are to have any mythology at all, he seems to argue, why object to adding to the myths of Jesus? There could not be a more damaging admission than this one from one of the most conspicuous defenders of Jesus' story against early criticism. Justin Martyr, another early father, offers the following argument against unbelievers in the Christian legend. When we say also that the Word, which is the first birth of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified, died, and rose again, and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those whom you esteem sons of Jupiter, which is another way of saying that the Christian myths are very similar to the pagan, and should therefore be equally true. Pressing his argument further, this interesting father discovers many resemblances between what he himself is preaching and the pagans have always believed. For you know how many sons your esteemed writers ascribe to Jupiter. Mercury, the interpreting word and teacher of all, Aesculapius, to heaven, one Hercules, and Perseus, and Bellerophon, who, from mortals, rose to heaven on the horses of Pegasus. If Jupiter can have, Justin Martyr seems to reason, half a dozen divine sons, why cannot Jehovah have at least one? Instead of producing historical evidence or appealing to creditable documents as one would prove the existence of a Caesar or an Alexander, Justin Martyr draws upon pagan mythology in his reply to the critics of Christianity. All he seems to ask for is that Jesus be given a higher place among the divinities of the ancient world. To help their causes, the Christian apologists not infrequently also change the sense of certain Old Testament passages to make them support the miraculous stories in the New Testament. For example, having borrowed from Oriental books the story of the God in a manger surrounded by staring animals, the Christian fathers introduced a prediction of this event into the following text from the book of Habakkuk in the Bible. Accomplish thy work in the midst of the years make known, etc. Hebrews, what is that, 3:2? This Old Testament text appeared in the Greek translation as follows. Thou shalt manifest thyself in the midst of two animals, which was fulfilled, of course, when Jesus was born in a stable. How weak must one's case to resort to such tactics in order to command a following? And when it is remembered that these follies were deemed necessary to prove the reality of what has been claimed as the most stupendous event in all history, one can readily see upon how fragile a foundation is built the story of the Christian God-man. Let us continue.